everyone. We're so glad that you are joining us today for our Surfacing Creative Leadership conversation on Purposeful and Visionary. As everyone gets settled, head over to the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. I'm Sarah, Senior Content Editor for Leadership Circle, and I will be your host. I'm here in Tacoma, Washington, in the upper left corner of the continental US, where it is predictably overcast, but it's still going to be a great day. So let's see where some people are coming in from. Let's see. We've got New York City, British Columbia, Sioux Falls, Toronto. Oh, we've got
Johannesburg.
the Netherlands, South Africa. My gosh, coming from all over the world. Morristown, New Jersey, Austin. Wow, Los Angeles. It looks like we've got people coming from all around the globe, and that is awesome. Welcome. We're really excited that you are here. While you're in chat and letting us know where you're coming from, if you've got any burning questions about the purposeful and visionary dimension or about how it might be used as an entry point for deep discovery during LCP debriefs or coaching conversations, drop your questions there. And when we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar in a little bit, we'll do our best to get your questions answered. Also, before we begin, let me just remind you of a few housekeeping items. First, please make sure that you're on mute. We've all been on calls where someone's forgotten or didn't realize they weren't on mute, and we've heard bits of conversation that, maybe we just really didn't need to hear. So while you've got a second, check and make sure that you are on mute. Also, if you feel comfortable, turn your camera on. We love to see smiling faces. They're so much more fun and interesting to look at than dark screens. So it'd be great if you could put your camera on for us. And also do remember that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for a rewatch in probably about a week or so. We'll send that link out to everyone who has registered. And with those reminders, I think we're ready to go. So let's begin. Welcome again to our Surfacing Creative Leadership conversation on the purposeful and visionary dimension of the Leadership Circle profile. This world needs creative leadership, and we at Leadership Circle know that you, as coaches and leaders, are in the best position possible to provide that, whether it's through your own leadership or through the leadership that you guide others to grow into. With our Surfacing Creative Leadership series, we're beginning an ongoing conversation to unpack, demystify, and surface insights within the dimensions of the LCP, one dimension at a time. Today, we're talking about purposeful and visionary. That's one of the two dimensions of the LCP most highly correlated to overall leadership effectiveness. In other words, it's a big one. Joining us for this conversation are three of Leadership Circle's expert coaches. We've got Amy Felix-Reese, Aaronde Seckou Creighton, and Renelle Everett Darr. Thanks for joining us, you three. Let's meet our coaches. Aaronde is Chief Diversity Officer at Leadership Circle. He leads strategy and practice in justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. As a seasoned coach and facilitator, as well as a systems thinker, he brings a unique blend of professional rigor and personal authenticity to every engagement. And word has it, he's just coming off of a debrief, so he is fresh for the taking today. Aaronde is known for keeping it real, and he draws on a career that spans operations, leadership development, organizational change, always opportunities to create impact that resonate. He lives in Atlanta with his family and serves as board chair of Coaching for Everyone. Renelle is a strategic advisor who works at the intersection of leadership, culture, and strategy. As founder of Insight, she always brings a systems lens to her work, offering leadership labs, executive coaching, and strategic advising. You can also catch her on her podcast and video series, Conscious Insights, where she explores emerging leadership practices. Based in Golden, Colorado, she likes to live life on the edge and has a passion for innovation. And finally, as Leadership Circle's Global Chief Operating Officer, Amy brings nearly 30 years of hands-on leadership and team systems experience to her work as a consultant and coach. She partners with execs and teams to navigate complexity, and always with clarity, alignment, and conscious choice. Known for helping leaders shift from protective patterns to co-creative engagement, Amy thrives in moments of transition and opportunity and always helps leaders deepen their capacity and fuel their growth. What a crew. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Our
Good to
pleasure.
Absolutely. So I'd like to begin with a question, a pretty broad question for all three of you. In Mastering Leadership and in the Leadership Circle profile, we say that the primary contribution of leaders is to cultivate purpose and vision. In your experience, what does that look like? How does purposeful and visionary show up in a leader? And how does a leader's capacity in that dimension influence how they show up?
Well, I'll jump in. I call it the spark. Identity is at the center of our circle for a reason, and how we see ourselves and how we show up and what we identify with. And I've often used the phrase, never put your identity in things that come and go, right? Things outside of you. But if I say, this is my purpose, this is my vision, this is my spark, that's the fuel, that's the energy that calls us to rise up to create something bigger than ourselves. And so if you look at what the creative half is for, it's for co-creation and contribution towards something that we care about, that's aligned with our values and our personal mission, but it's also bigger than us. And so it automatically invites a we mentality into it. But that's where I see it as being the spark. And it's at the core of our creative tension model as well. If you don't have that, you might flounder into that reactive spin. How about you, Aaronde? Are you a Renelle? How do you see it?
Go for it, Renelle.
Yeah, Amy, I love the spark. One of the ways I've been working also with purpose lately is utilizing some of the term the red thread. And so just imagining that we're on a spiral and there's so many new things emerging and there are things expiring, but there's this key purpose within us, within our organizations, within our communities of, why we exist, why we're here, not what we do, but why we're here. And it's this constant that as things are spiraling, changing, expiring, emerging, there's this constant that just feels like an anchor, an embodiment that doesn't change when everything around us is changing.
Yeah. I think that what comes to mind for me is the Lewis Carroll quote. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And leaders who understand not only the power and importance of the role that they occupy, whether that's leading two people on the front line or being a CEO for an organization of 18,000, the ones who are intentional about where they're going, they know what roads will get them there, as opposed to those individuals who may find themselves defaulting and therefore, I'd almost call it crowdsourcing direction and guidance, right? If this organization over here is now all in on AI to do X, Y, and Z, then we're going to do that, right? As opposed to understanding the power of having a focal point, of understanding your purpose and vision, and being able to say no to certain things because they don't align and say yes to certain things because they do, right? I was listening to a podcast and one of the guests said, when I'm deciding to take a meeting or to work on something, the question I ask myself is this my best possible yes? Meaning, if I accept this, is this the best possible use of my time at this time? As opposed to, this is an okay thing to do, which is, I think, where many of us find ourselves falling into by default.
Yeah. You know what I love about that? It keeps you from those squirrel moments of attention grabbers, right? Well, that's curious and that's interesting. I think in our community and looking around all the folks who are here with us today, we are a community of learners and we love to learn. And we often get to work with people who love to learn. So
Mm.
that could open up the squirrel candy store of, oh, there's a nut, there's a nut, there's a nut. And
Yeah.
it can be exhausting. But if we have that red thread, as Renelle said, like, this is who I am no matter what, it might have different expressions, but that drumbeat of what we're up to does not change.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something I find interesting hearing you talk about this is we also think about purpose and vision or purposeful and visionary as having sort of two avenues. You are either the originator of the vision or you are facilitating a vision. Um, how does that fit into what you're talking about, this kind of this both this red thread and also the, that any road can get you there?
I might jump in if that's okay. When you said that, and we were talking the other day, I was thinking about a project that I was recently on where we were facilitating the vision and updated purpose and values of an organization. And this particular leader, it was a leader that wanted to engage the entire institution and how we are evolving the institution.
Mm.
And so there's another way to do this of I have a vision and I want to bring you all forward with me, which is also an amazing way to go. This particular leader um, had a little bit different way of going about this. And so as facilitators, we talked to the entire organization. Maybe not every single person, but surveys and stakeholder groups, et cetera. But I'll tell you, when we came back around to the new simple vision statement, the thing that was so different, I mean, the words were good. They were good words, but the thing that was different was that the leader was able to bring everybody into it. So then the words were republished, everybody felt different. And so
Mm.
it wasn't the words you were reading, it was the way you were feeling. And we got a couple of comments back of, I think my favorite one is, I haven't felt like this about the organization for many, many years, and something feels different.
Mm.
And so I think, I hadn't done the leadership circle with this particular leader. It was more of a systems project. Would have to guess that there would be a strong, purposeful, and visionary. And it wasn't necessarily because he was guiding everyone for where he wants to go, but he was so committed to developing a shared vision. And so that when we think about the way of engaging other people to create a vision, that one just it really sticks with me. Like I can just feel it in my body.
Mhm.
You know, the energy that comes with that, if you look at our, mastering leadership and scaling leadership, they talk about purposeful and visionary and collaboration, right? And bringing the team along and as key contributors to leadership effectiveness. So where that comes in is that's a perfect example, Renelle, of where you see that it's really a we, and when people can chew on it and process it and make it theirs, now it's not the push or pull of one or a few leaders, because that's a reactive stance, right? But when you get that co-creative collaborative, it means you have partnership, it means you have trust that we can all see this together, and it welcomes the diverse viewpoints and perspectives that round it out and make it better so
Mm.
everyone can access it.
Mm.
Then you get to stand back. I mean, how many of us and how many leaders, so many times they have an idea, but when they let go and surrender, once they know everyone's got directional correctness, like they're just blown away by what's created bigger and beyond anything they could have. So I love that perspective, Renelle.
I think something that's important, it's listed as a competency of purposeful and visionary, but those are two very different words. And actually, if we go into the actual questions for purposeful and visionary, you can see the segment that happens, the segmentation, right? There's 6 questions there. I articulate a vision that creates alignment within the organization. I live and work with a deep sense of purpose. I communicate a compelling vision, right? You can hear some of that focus on making sure that there is some purpose and some reason and rationale behind that. And then when we go into the last 3 questions, I'm a good role model for the vision I espouse. I provide strategic vision for the organization. I inspire others with vision, right? And so, even using that example that Renelle just shared with us, um, you can hear while, yes, this person cast this vision, there was this opportunity for others to connect with it as well and find their way of stepping into it as leaders and engaging it not just for themselves, but for the organizations or the parts of the organization that they were responsible for. So I think it's important to remember while we put it together of purposeful and visionary, it's actually two traits that are there that's important for us to kind of acknowledge and recognize.
I think that's a great point. The other thing that came to me when you said that, Aaronde, was there's this combination of head and heart, of where, we are, um, rationally and logically engaging people, coming up with plans, but we're also really embodying and bringing in our being to this. And they are not separate. They go together, but sometimes it's hard to see, like, oh, which am I off balance with one of these?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Aaronde, it's interesting that you bring up the kind of some of the splits in the questions. You've recently talked about how about half the questions related to purposeful and visionary on the profile are about the individual, and about half of them are about the organization.
Mhm.
When you're approaching a leader in a coaching conversation, does that come into play at all as you're thinking about, using purposeful and visionary as an entry point for a debrief or for a conversation?
Yeah, so of course I would be remiss if I didn't say, because probably a good 25% of people who are on this call, I probably certified you sometime in the past 10 years. So, of course, I never go immediately to purposeful and visionary because I'm always going to follow the energy that my client has around where they want to go in the creative. All right. So let's just start there, Sarah. But,
Fair.
no, I do think it's important that when purposeful and visionary does come up, right, being able to lean into a conversation with the client to see what resonates and doesn't for them there. Sometimes as leaders, I mean, the reality is that you may not have had an active hand in the creation of that vision, right? In terms of that organizational vision, but how do you personalize it and make it your own for the areas that you have responsibility for? And I think that that's sometimes a perspective that folks don't always take, right? I think we live in a world and society that says that we're all supposed to just jump on board with the vision that's there, right? I mean, how many of us have worked with organizations or been part of organizations where the vision is in these, 2 by 3 letters all over the top floor going into the CEO's office, and you feel like you're having to commit them to memory and those kinds of things. That's not the reality of how vision works. And so, what is it that connects for me with this vision, and then what is the area of responsibility that I've been hired to do that connects back to it, right? That's an important aspect for us to kind of make it a little bit more of our own and be able to take ownership in an appropriate way for the vision and purpose of that organization. So I see Amy's eyes getting big, so probably popcorn it over to her to add to that.
Well, I was just thinking of my own personal experience. So prior to joining Leadership Circle, I ran my own practice for 20 years. And my mission of me and my business was really clearly aligned with leadership circles, which many here can, probably say, yeah. Um, but then when I was talking with Bill Adams about what the vision of the company was, I was so excited and all in, to scale our mission, right? And how we were planning to do it. It wasn't mine. I had a different view of how I was running things, but when I joined the organization, I got really excited and I made it mine. And I found my way and my path, and I still do every day, right? Every day, business conditions change. Every day, there are new people, new factors, new everything. So that's part of us being in the VUCA world. How do I find my inspiration, and how do I help my teams say, oh yeah, this is exciting. I have no idea what you're talking about, Amy, but I think I feel your excitement. And then together we figure out like, here's where we're going. But there is something where I love what you said, Aaronde. You really got to find, even when it's not yours, you've got to find your why, find your energy. And so the other thing I would say is um, one of the tools I use a lot with people is, where do you feel light and where do you feel heavy?
Mhm.
Where do you feel light and where do you feel heavy? And it's not to go to societies like everything has to be happy. That's not what I'm talking about. And referring back to what Renelle was talking about, embodying, and what Aaronde was talking to, like, what's the lightness in me that resonates vibrationally with this direction where we're going? And where doesn't it?
Yeah.
For me to do a personal inquiry into that. And it's not to instantly say right, wrong, good, bad, right? Because then we're in the reactive. It's just to notice. And then from that, craft my in and my why. And then help others around me to do the same.
Absolutely. I would just add one thing as well as, and again, to what Arande said, we have to look at where the energy is, but a pattern that I have engaged in over the years is noticing that when we take a look at the integrity, i.e., someone's values, and take a look and go down deep into what are your values, and not only what are your values, but how much are you living and breathing your asserted values on a daily basis. And when we start doing some of that self work, there is a correlation a lot of times with some of my clients that the purposeful and visionary for both themselves and the system will increase by getting in touch with that. So not always, but sometimes when there's something curious about purposeful and visionary, or maybe it's lower than you would expect, I'm always curious, like I wonder what, integrity and courageous authenticity are looking like as well.
Yeah. I appreciate both the ads that you all just gave, and I want to go back to something Amy said around the energy. And I think this is really important when it comes to purposeful and visionary. Um, and so hear me out in full, folks, as I say this, okay? I think as coaches, we sometimes rely too much on a tool or a framework or the five-step process for X, Y, and Z. Okay. There are intelligences that have always existed within us that many times we need to teach ourselves and make our clients aware um, that they already have. You don't need a new tool from me, right? I mean, there's a book that I have on my summer reading list called "What Makes You Come Alive,"
Mhm.
and it's in line with Howard Thurman. For those who may not be familiar, Howard Thurman was an African American theologian, probably in some ways aligned with Richard Rohr before Richard Rohr was here. Okay. And what I love about that context is we sometimes dismiss the excitement that we feel in a new environment or that sense of dread that might be coming over as you're getting ready to go into a client engagement. That's some of the somatic intelligence and the body intelligence that's in us that we need to spend a little bit more time investigating, right? And so when we're talking about something like purposeful and visionary, just like Amy using her example, there was something that came alive in her as she came on to Leadership Circle as Bill was sharing the vision and the direction, right? Well, Amy has learned and allowed herself to lean into that and to understand the power of that internal intelligence and what it's telling her, regardless of what the books say, right? If in a Western context, we spend way too much time being validated by a book or a certification, right? My friend Teresa is on here, and as they love to say in Kenya, my body betrays me, right? My body will tell me if this is something that I'm excited and ready to do, or if it's something that like, oh, I'm waiting to the last minute to get on this flight and get ready to do it, right? And so I think that that's an important noticing as we have these conversations with our clients around purposeful and visionary.
I love that. And there are a couple of things I want to capitalize on. Renelle, you were just talking about how, in the noticing about purposeful and visionary, you might also check in with integrity or with courageous authenticity or kind of check in with some um other dimensions. Knowing that there are built-in relationships with the dimensions kind of inherent in the model. This is a two-part question. First is, what are some of those relationships that you might look to just to get curious, just to help inform what you're looking into, and then I'll tell you the second part after you guys answer that. So what are some of those relationships? Renelle, you mentioned courageous authenticity and integrity. Are there others that you look to, you think, oh, I'm curious about what this means, or I want to see how these are connecting?
I could tell you a curiosity about my own profile. So the first time I took my profile was probably in when I got certified in 2010, and I don't, it was several years later, I was on a really large transformation project. And the way I had shown up on those projects 10 years prior was very perfectionistic, et cetera. And so I wanted to do it again to see, like, I was a consultant. So, but I was like, am I showing up differently in these huge transformation projects? And so I was going back and looking at these, and something really interesting had happened is I had always had a really high purposeful and visionary score, but as the perfectionistic part of me started to decrease, and there was, and my relational side started to really increase. I noticed that particular time that purposeful and visionary had gone down. And so just in my own knowing, just so because I know the energy and I know what was happening, is I look back at that and I was like, okay, one thing was, I was not the one setting the vision, but I don't think that's actually where it came from. What I think it came from is that I somewhat over focused on building the relationships because it was so important to me, and let go a little bit too much of my own purpose and vision. And so I found that so interesting of like, wow, I've done such great work over here on relationship, and I took myself out of balance with the deeper, purposeful, more visionary piece, which was something that was historically a strength of mine. So it's not that it wasn't a strength anymore, but I had to find the balance again. And so I'm not, I've seen that some also in other leaders sometimes when they're trying to work on something, say across the model of like, my high controlling. So I want to maybe work on the relationship a little bit more. And then sometimes that part of me that was so strong, the visionary, can decrease a little bit. And that's okay, right? And then we work to bring it back into balance. So that's something that additionally that came to me as you were talking about what we see on the profiles.
Mm.
I love that.
One thing I just want to highlight from what you said is you over-indexed on the relationship with others, but what you didn't use these words, but what I heard was you lost relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not completely, but like
Yeah.
that soul part of you. And I think that's what happens when we coach a lot of folks. They're like, oh, I've got to go over here across, and that means I can't do anything here. And they're just little experiments. They're little dials, right? I often say it's like a syringe. I'm not giving you the full shot. We're just going to do a little bit to see how it works. And I think if you have somebody who has really strong achieving scores and they're hitting their wall, pop them up to, or maybe not reactive achieving, not creative achieving, pop them up on their strength into that, reconnection to self and other, right? Because then you can bring in the relationship. And the other thing I've noticed too is that dance between if they have low purpose and vision and maybe high belonging, high passive or pleasing and low courageous authenticity. And that's kind of the traditional way we go. But sometimes people have that vision within them, but they don't have the confidence or contextually not the right environment or not the skill set, whatever it is. They're hesitant to be courageously authentic and say, actually, no, this is what matters to me.
Hmm.
And so that's that whole, what I call the keystone of the creative, which is authenticity. And if we can get them to start accessing it more within themselves and voicing it and saying it in a lot of little experimental ways, it kind of builds their muscle to now bring it forward into more of an exposed place. Whereas before it's like it has to be here
Hmm.
because the fear of rejection or being wrong can be so strong. So, the cool thing about our assessment is that there are many different windows in, um, but listening to the context of the person and sensing into them will give us some doorways. Aaronde, I know you do so much work here. I'm curious where you guide people in or what else you look at.
Yeah, I think you hit it, Amy, with, there's always so many different windows, and Renelle gave a beautiful example of leaning in from her own profile. You talked about the belonging and the courageous authenticity. And then sometimes just simplicity of the integrity, right? I think sometimes the dilemma that leaders find themselves in is as we go to higher levels of the organization, um, we can sometimes negate our own connection to the vision, right? In other words, I work here, I'm part of, I'm the COO or I'm whatever the role is, and we don't always pay attention to, but this direction that we're moving, does it align with my values, right? Does it allow me to walk my own talk, from that integrity space? And so sometimes, especially if it's a second or third, when I begin to see some drops in that integrity as well as that purposeful and visionary, you know, are you, how are you feeling about your role in the direction that things are going, right? Is there a little bit of a feeling of a mismatch, and have you allowed yourself the time and space to explore that, and to get curious? I'm reading Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown's last book. I didn't read it when it first came out, but there's a portion in there where she talks about there's actually power in uncertainty. And when I have someone who says, "Well, I used to think this, but now I'm not quite sure," that lets me know that this person is in a heightened space of self-awareness and that they're evaluating maybe what they always thought was going to be the case and seeing that as like not quite the same thing now, right? And that's again, that gives us clues and it gives us some great places to explore, and make meaning for ourselves.
Jessica put in the chat earlier about it's really important to lean into that tension, and that's what you both so beautifully just you know outlined. It's like when there is that tension, like lean into it, don't try and push it away, but get curious. And we often say, right, curiosity is a gateway from reactive to creative.
The other thing that you mentioned, Aaronde, was the word space.
Mhm.
Mm.
And it really, like I could just feel that of like, the purposeful, the visionary to bring, we need space for that. And space is something that is, especially in the Western culture, is something that sometimes feels elusive. And I know one client that made me think of this is when we first started working together and we did his leadership circle debrief, we talked about space and he literally told me, he's like, if I made more space, what would I fill it with? And I said, well, nothing. And he's like, that feels very illogical. And I was like, it is illogical because it's not based on logic. And so fast forward several months later, and many of our, I think Sarah said I live in Golden, Colorado, and it is also the home of Coors Beer. So we have the magical creek that supposedly, the magical water. But we do a lot of our sessions now by the creek. Now that it's spring, and we walk the creek, and he is now to the place of, how I said that was so illogical? I can't even imagine that not having the space now and not having, and then the space that we make to walk the creek. I am like, I'm not, I don't know if you use the exact words, but it's like the space that I'm giving myself is creating a whole new, like purposeful and visionary way of being at work.
Mm,
And it was so cool just to watch literally looking at me one day saying, almost, not saying I'm crazy, but I got that look from him to now like, whoa, like this is really making a difference for me.
yeah.
That's really important right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning space. Whew.
I should have known this was going to happen because you actually tackled the second part of my question and what you all just talked about, which was essentially not losing the context, right? Because I think one of the powerful pieces of our model is that there are so many interrelationships between the dimensions and the reactive and the creative. But I would imagine that it also might be tempting and maybe reassuring to start to make some assumptions based on patterns that you see or based on some of those relationships and then go in thinking, oh, well, I know this about this leader because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to ask about how you get curious with leaders that you're working with, but you're also already giving us so many great ideas. This question about what makes you light, what makes you heavy, these questions about what is your why, how are you getting into? Are there other tactics? Are there other things that you kind of pull out of your pocket when you think, all right, we've got to get this leader curious? What do we
I,
do?
I think Renelle really tapped into it, but we have to slow him down. We have from a societal perspective, and Amy and I use this a lot with folks. We have created urgency as a virtue. Just go, do, make it happen, make it happen. And as soon as people start spinning up in urgency, their ability to quickly get stuck spins up as well, right? And because we've made this virtue of get it done now, urgency, we're always on call, people are always feeling like Renelle's leader that they have to be in motion, right? You can be in motion on a treadmill, but you ain't going nowhere, right? And I think that that's the thing that we need to get people to slow down, right? Slow down. It's okay. You have time, you have space. It'll be fine, right? One of my coaching clients took that dialogue that we had and he simplified it this way, and he said, "Busy is the new stupid." And all he meant by that was our insatiable need to have a full Outlook calendar and all of these things is actually not making us smart, right? Because we're not even giving ourselves the space to just sit, and there's power in daydreaming. There's power in slowing down, right? Yes, Bio says that quote all the time. Love Bio, spend some time with him. Times are urgent. Let us slow down, right? That has to happen. So I think that that's an overarching big approach, is to normalize the fact that you don't have to have an answer right now. Just slow down and be. Notice what comes up for you when you do nothing but maybe listen to music or walk in your backyard with your shoes off, feeling the grass, which feels like I don't have time for this, right? But some of the best ideas come out of that space of slowing down.
Yeah, I just think that that cannot be overlooked, and it often is. Some context does matter, and sometimes people are leading transformations. And when we work with people who are leading, or most folks we work with, when they're leading transformations, either in their own life or others, there is a sense of urgency, right, to our life and our business. But how do you not become the urgency?
Mhm.
And I think that's what Aaronde and Renelle are talking to. There's a lot of great books. Some of you maybe on this call today wrote some of them about pausing in leadership and pausing in life. And, we know about that, but, is, in the chat, false urgency. We often say in our work, and I know many of you say it, slow down to go fast. But then I also have been wondering, like, so why do we have to go fast? What
Yeah.
if, what does Brene say? I want to get it right. I don't want to be right. And so what if we slow down to get it right? And then we make the next right move. If we're fueled by purpose and vision, it will keep us directionally correct.
Mm.
And
Personally,
sometimes there is a need to activate, right? I mean, there is,
sure.
that's not to Aronde's point, it can be really overused, especially, in society, in leadership. But there is something really exciting about the activation. And I think personally, there's something really excited about the activation that comes after a pause versus the one that never has a pause. Is the activation just, it's the spark that you said earlier, Amy? It's a much bigger spark when it has the oxygen, the fuel, the pause to feed it.
There's something, there's a lot out there right now about mental health and space, and it deserves a very important seat at the table in the work we do. And I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about when the switch gets left on. We talk about the amygdala hijack of fight, flight, freeze. When that switch gets left on and you've lost your off switch, everything's urgent, everything's high stress, everything, everywhere, all at once, that movie. So, what do we need to do to start allowing that switch to turn off, right? And what are the presencing mechanisms we can do? Because leadership presence, as we've moved into purposeful and visionary, hyper doesn't necessarily win people over. It's intentional. And I will say the two people I'm on this podcast with are the two very intentional human beings I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. And when you put that intentionality out there towards your purpose and vision, you can go fast, but you don't have to go hyper. And I think that's a really important distinction to help our clients ease into, because some of them are so programmed, and the context that they live and work and lead in are rewarding that hyper warp speed.
Absolutely.
Listen, I am loving these insights and this conversation. It's so rich, but also I want to make sure we have time to get to some questions that are in the chat. So, with an eye toward time, I just want to encourage anyone, if you've got questions, put them in. We've got a few good questions already coming in. And also to say that if you're enjoying this conversation, there's going to be more of them. We're going to be having these monthly as part of the Surfacing Creative Leadership series. And so let's get to some questions. So first, here's one. How do you integrate purposeful and visionary into the narratives that leaders create?
I think the word narratives can be taken so many ways.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting all three of us paused at that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's kind of why I was pausing is like, how are we defining narrative? Yeah.
Hmm.
About narrative identity,
Yeah.
which is the body of our work. Are we talking about the narratives we tell ourselves, the narratives we tell others? It's all woven, but they're all so separate.
Mm.
Could that be another place to help leaders get curious about what their narratives are and how their purpose or how vision shows up in those places?
Yeah, I think that you could easily take that and frame it into the question from Amy, what's the story that you're making up about purposeful and visionary for you? Right. And something like that allows the person to explore and investigate on their own what their connection is or is not to not just purposeful and visionary from how they were scored, but also just the overall concept and context of purpose and vision.
Well, and maybe even as a follow-up, not intentionally necessarily, but there's a question from the chat that asks, how have you worked with a leader to help them define their purpose?
Mm.
One thing that I mentioned earlier was it seems basic, but it actually can be quite transformative is going back to like your values. Like that is just a place that I will return to again and again. And because values can change over time, how we're living our values can change over time, and how we're activating them, what our environment is like. And so it's not the only thing, but it seems to be a really great spark when someone is feeling lost into what their purpose is. I think, and then starting to combine, to Amy's point, what lights you up, what brings you energy, what are your strengths, what are your talents, what do you love, and you start to bring all of that in together. And you kind of have this big pot, and it's like, oh, here's the pot of these things that are my values and what I feel and what brings me light. And then it's like, let's start to get a little more specific about then what does that mean and where am I going with that from here? So that's the first thing that came to me, not the only way, but just something that feels whole and when I'm working with people and myself, quite frankly.
I think I've probably recently gotten away from this guidance of people towards purpose and vision. And what I mean by that is I'm keenly aware that especially if you've been paying attention to the coaching arena in the past year to 18 months, there's a lot of focus on, what's your purpose, what's your vision. I've got the 5-step program that will always help you identify for your client. Go be an Ikagi coach, and to me, it's let's slow that down again, right? And like Renelle said, here's a few questions I just want you to take some time to think on. And I don't necessarily need to hear all those details, right? I might just simply say, so what's this process been like for you? What's coming up for you that wasn't there before, right? Because the thing that I think we have to constantly remind ourselves is we have this instrument that we can gain a level of expertise on, but there's this amazing human being that we'll never be experts on. And the reality is they have all the answers in themselves, right? Some of us as coaches have made ourselves indispensable by thinking that we're the guide and the sage all the time. And I think we got to back off of that a little bit, right? There's some things that we can throw out to them to help them in their process, but their process got to be their process.
And I would just add two things to that. Many of us do parts work. We offer a parts workshop. But here's something, like if you listen and you hear someone say, well, part of me would like to do this and part of me thinks it's that, then we have a conversation with that part of them. Like, tell me, who's that?
Yeah.
Right? That's one thing. And the other thing is something I tell my 17-year-old son. He's a lot of talents, a lot of interests, a lot of gifts. He's 17. His purpose will have many different expressions throughout his lifetime. Our purpose has many different expressions throughout our lifetime. So I think what blocks people is they think, I got to get it. I got to do it all now and I got to get it right because it's my freaking purpose. It's big. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like Andre just said, it will probably evolve. So it's okay. I think we make it like so serious. Let's have fun with it a little bit.
Yeah.
Evie, I love that you bring up your 17-year-old. It made me remember I was with a group of grad students, I don't know, last fall sometime. And I remember when we were going around and one said, the biggest thing that I'm realizing that is my purpose is who I am and not what I do. And
Mhm.
so many people are tied up into this is like what I do is my purpose. And to hear a young person who a future leader for us to say, "Oh, I'm like leaving grad school. Like, this is actually who I am and not something else I have to do.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
We have a question that wants to jump back to this whole idea of slow is fast concept. And it says, I'd love to hear if there are any reflective questions you use when coaching that helps leaders own this idea, this slow is fast. Let's slow down. Maybe not to speed up, but to get it right concept.
It's a challenging answer for me because I don't have kind of a I don't have a pad list, right? So much of it is just being in the moment with that person. And I think Amy's and Renelle have thrown out, some, what's making you come alive? How are you, yeah, it's so in the moment for me. So yeah, I don't know if there's any light that either of you can kind of shine into maybe some questions that have worked for you.
We've got some great questions that our participants are putting in the chat.
I don't know if I have a question, but it reminded me of a situation a couple of years ago when we were near the end of a leadership lab with a group of women, and we were talking about vision. And I don't know, sometimes I talk about vision at the end of these longer sessions because we're doing so much work that if I ask you at the beginning, like, do you really you're gonna there's so much work you're doing beforehand. And I remember that I came over to see how her work was going, and she was in tears. And she was like, I actually don't have a vision. And it was just in this shameful place of, I don't have a vision. What is wrong with me? And for me, I think the question was something about, what if this is the best discovery you could have found today?
Yeah.
Is that you actually don't know, or you don't think you know yet. And I don't know if that's the exact question I asked, but I just remember it was in the moment. And this person I still know 4 or 5 years later. I don't know if I would say, what's your vision now? And she would be able to say, but when I watch her living her life right now, she is living that into that question that she had no answer for, that she thought she had no answer for and was in tears on. And I have just watched her transform off of the hard question of not knowing, not thinking she knew what her vision was.
Yeah.
There's something as we talk, we're going to the head. We're so stuck in our head. I had a coach years ago, and I've used this after doing some somatic work and training, but it's like, where's space live in your body? And to help them breathe into that and sense, where is space living in your body right now?
Mhm.
And just that, like, wait, what? I can't access my body. We're talking about stuff here. And I'm like, uh-huh. And eventually they get there and they can find a space. Just that process
Mhm.
opens up spaciousness. It's like, oh, what's available here? Like, help them understand what space is. I help them understand what can be accessed from there.
Mhm.
There's some really great questions in the chat. And again, they can pop us here. Like, what's in here? And I know when I feel constricted physically, I can't access that space to be.
Mhm.
And then I can't access the space to see.
Mhm.
I think we've got time yet for just maybe one last question, which is, what are some ways to help people differentiate between their personal vision and their professional or business vision? Or is it even necessary to do so?
My sense is that for some people, those they feel a need and want those to be somewhat separate, and and others absolutely can't, and they don't want to blur that. And I don't necessarily feel like it's my role to say you have to have them be separate. I might ask what feels aligned and always there, regardless of if it's at work or in your personal. And also, I'm a person that mind doesn't blur. I'm the same kind of the I need one for both. And there are other people that actually feel the need to have a little bit separate. And so I'll ask lightly, what feels to be that constant regardless, but also really respecting that both both and I guess. There we are, the both and.
We got there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important to know. Is this someone who feels like they have to be aligned, right? And in situations where they don't, some of the encouragement I'll give clients is, identify your non-negotiables about job, right? What is it that this job absolutely has to have for you? And it may not be the purpose and vision. It may be um, other things that are important to them as an individual or their family or their community, right? That again, it at least allows them to make the connection of, I know this is why I'm here, even if I'm not personally connected to the vision or purpose of this organization. I know why am making the conscious effort and decision to remain here, to be here, right? So I think that's something I think the ideal that we hear is that there's always going to be alignment in SBS.
No. And, I've coached people where the exact way to get in is they have a lit up purpose they're living outside of work, whether it be their art or writing or family or spiritual group or whatever. And sometimes where they feel stuck at work is because they're not living that expression outside because they feel like it's got to be all the same. And once they loosen up, then they can access that outside of work, and it actually brings that energy and sweeps them right back in to more full engagement, and something emerges in this category for them. So it's loosening up and, yeah, living life.
Well, that seems like kind of a perfect sentiment to end things on. That about does it for us. We've got 2 minutes to the top of the hour, and I just want to say thank you, everybody, speakers and guests who've joined us for this great conversation today. We invite you to come back and join us next month. We'll explore the conservative dimension, and then in July, we're tackling personal learner. But for today, I just want to say on behalf of Leadership Circle and our guests, Amy Felix-Reese, Aaronde, Seckou Creighton, and Renelle Everett Darr, I'm Sarah Stahl for Leadership Circle. We want to thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.